developers can say, do you do this? If we don't, we say no. And we think that's an important thing. But everything really is in the cloud. And there are times when there is still a need for some on-prem services that you might have. And I'll talk about that as well, because you can still move most of everything into the cloud. And if you still needed a local Active Directory for things, which I'll cover, that might be a good scenario. But let's say, as we start this off, that really at the end, this is what we want to look like. No local Active Directory infrastructure. All of our, whether we're doing desktop as a service through Azure Virtual Machines, through Azure Virtual Desktop or Windows 365, managing the desktops that are completely joined to Azure Active Directory, managed through Intune, controlling the device lifecycle through that, using things like managed devices for universal print, managed phones. Again, all cloud services that you have, and many of you might even be close to this, with the exception that you still have some local Active Directory that's going on, and we'll talk about that. So first off, when we think about where many people are, legacy infrastructure, and it's tough to say because there's Windows Server 2019, there's still Azure Active Directory, Microsoft is still investing in it because, like I said, there are some reasons why you need to have that, because of certain applications that need to be on-prem. You're a manufacturing organization. The ERP system has to work with the local AD. But even there, we found where customers can remove that dependency and still have what they need because they're a 24-hour shop. When the network goes down, the machines don't care, and we have to continue to operate. But many other organizations don't need that. But there's some small cases. So do you have to keep a local Active Directory? You could, or you could not, and still manage those devices through the cloud. Another webinar for that. But in some of these areas, you might have servers deployed. You might have multiple offices, and you have an Active Directory domain domain controllers deployed in different locations and file servers in different locations. They could be co-load, they can be in the office, they can be wherever it is. Understanding that they are all out there, and there's this networking. Again, when you start to if you're more of a CFO or financially driven, CIO, and you start really adding up the math, right? Of wait a minute, I have, in order for this topology to keep working, I have to continue to invest in, site-to-site VPNs or an MPLS network in order to keep those servers talking for what? Desktops? So you save money on that, the support contracts, the network, it just starts to add up. It's not just the price of a server. Yeah, I buy a server, I have that, and that's cheaper than putting the other licensing. You got to really add up all the costs, to really look at it. But it's also the people that you have to have, the management you have to have. It just adds up. And the other part is really any servers that you might even have deployed in Azure to support local Active Directory or remote connectivity. So you look at all of these pieces that really is your infrastructure. And some of the biggest challenges that we see when you are today is, well, when we provision new workstations or desktops, if we're doing it the more traditional model, we haven't really applied endpoint management. When we have custom images that we create, and every time somebody new comes on board, you may have to get some new equipment and send it to the IT person because they need it locally. There's strategies to do it, but they're more complex to get that server up and running. Join the local Active Directory environment, making sure that's good, even if it's hybrid with Endpoint Manager and Azure Active Directory. You still got to make sure those are configured properly. The local security for the application. There's just all this overhead just to get people started on their applications. This session, I'm not going to talk about specifically how to do that with Endpoint Manager and Azure AD, but we've had, I think, some sessions, and there'll be future webinars that we do that talks a little bit more about that specific scenario. But this adds more overhead. Every time they want to access, the users want to access local services, they have to VPN in. And so now they VPN in, and that also maps to our file server. Even though we're still using SharePoint and OneDrive, it's they're still bound to this. It's on our E drive, and the application I use only works when I'm connected via VPN with the E drive. So now we have to maintain the VPN and the connectivity. Yes, there's things like always on VPN that's available with Windows 11 and Windows, but it's just more and more infrastructure you have to manage, and then really ensuring that the policies that you have, if there's policies I have 4 workstations in this example that I need to either for compliance reasons or for management reasons, that I need to push out to those users. If they aren't VPNing in, and there's not an opportunity that the GPO, the group policy objects, have in order to get ran and honored, because maybe they were connected, it didn't run the GPO refresh, and then they disconnected. You have what you think you have managed devices out there. You really don't, because it doesn't listen that way. So yes, you can start to transition things to more endpoint manager again, but these are some of the heartaches that we have just from the onboard them, manage them, keep the infrastructure. So again, as we started out with why we're here today and where we're trying to go, let's talk about the different stages or states that we can have as we move along. So here's just a quick view of what many organizations look like. We're using Office 365 or Microsoft 365, using these applications. There is a, whether you know it or not, there is an Azure subscription, but it's mostly tied to your Azure Active Directory. We're not using it for much. We may have a VPN gateway, maybe not. But we are synchronizing with our local Active Directory users. And so this is a key concept as we go through three real key things. 1, your users, 2, your groups, and 3, your devices. And in this starting point, we may have already moved all of our mails, or SMTP toso.com is going to our Exchange Online. We're using those applications. We have the desktops either public on the internet because they're working from home or your little coffee shop, wherever they might be, but to access the applications that we have in our environment. So again, here it shows a little gray box, but it just represents that the inside of that network, because we know many of you might have that network that they connect into a co-location, but you might have servers in another place. So you're setting up, all these different network connections and routing, to kind of handle this. Either way, we have some computers that are inside of the network that that we use because they're always in the office. If we still have some of those floating around. And then those remote people, but everything's kind of bound in here. And this wasn't wrong. This was the way you're supposed to do it. For many years. And also the complexity to transition off of this can be daunting in some places. But over time, you've probably seen it for yourself, where that transition has been, from maybe an on-prem solution to in the cloud, because the vendor created one. Now we can leverage that and do a migration. So you may have naturally floated to something else. Other things you may have custom written yourself, and again, they might have been something you custom written, way back in the day, or continue to maintain. But and again, those old design principles, which was, hey, make sure the users can log on securely. We'll do, log in from the application, like let's say in the inventory system we have here that we created. That when they log on with their Active Directory credentials, and we'll use like NTLM or Kerberos in order to kind of feel like a single sign-on, because Windows is logged on to the same domain, the user is already authenticated, the access to the application is written in, let's say IIS and C# or whatever that is, or Java, and it accepts it. The user just kind of goes in, it just works, it's great. But that doesn't work well when it's inside of the VPN and I'm remote and I want to go into it. We do have other sessions we went through about supporting that through Azure AD, something called Azure Active Directory Proxy, but we're trying to get out of this scenario, right? So let's say this is our starting point, applications and things are here. So let's take the next step. Oops, sorry. Why is it going in the wrong way? Here we go. All right, so let's do our first step. We've already done our assessment, and we did the assessment. The things that we were really looking for was, what are the applications? We saw those line of business applications. Actually, let me take a step back. We look at these applications, and we're really trying to, assess, are these applications, what does it take to move them? And sometimes you ask the vendor, hey, can we move this into the cloud? They might have a cloud service, and migrating to that would be the preferred way because it's less infrastructure. They might decide that we don't have a SaaS version, or it's just not reasonable for that kind of thing. Can we support it in Azure? Many vendors now will support it because they've understood what it is. They're VMs, it's a network, just like it was on-prem, just a little bit different, and they're supporting it with some guidance. And you want to know which of these applications has a pure relying on local Active Directory. Let's just say, we'll go through this, and your applications and your approach could be different. But in this case, there's some applications, like we will identify that the ERP solution really needs a local Active Directory. And I'll talk about what's available inside of Azure so that you can have a little, still support that and still be very cloud native at the same time. The other key thing to really identify is on the networking side, because as you see when we move along in your network, most likely when people log onto their workstations, one of the things they'll have is DHCP. Sometimes you'll have a Windows server that's doing your DHCP. Other times you're going to have it from the network. Either way, something has to give the IP addresses if we're using DHCP. Second thing that DHCP tells you is your DNS pointer. And this is the place where the Windows workstations are normally told, because again, that's in their either DHCP that's coming from a Windows server or from the firewall router, doesn't matter either way. But they'll say, here's the DNS server, which 95% of the time points to a local Active Directory server, because that's how it knows where the domain controller is and how people can access it. When we have to start thinking, when we remove that, we're going to have to change our networking. What will provide DHCP service? What will be the DNS routing that we have? Do we, if we're doing split brain DNS, how are we going to, when do we do that and not impact all the other applications? So that's the sneaky one, or one of the sneaky ones, is knowing where your DHCP, where your DNS, when to make those changes, because if you make that changes for all the devices, well, then they might not authenticate to local Active Directory, and when they try and access one of these other applications, that could be a problem. So one of those things that you should look at in terms of the assessment. So looking at the networking, looking at the infrastructure that you have, what's going to transition to a SaaS-based application, what needs to be something we still have to manage, my way, view. And in the case I'm going to give here is inside of Azure. You don't necessarily have to put in there, but when we talk about the ERP one, you'll see one area that might be helpful as we go through it. Okay, so in this example, one of the things we're going to do is kind of keep things the same. Now here you see a little bit, something might be kind of confusing because I'm VPNing in, but you might have some other workstations that just Azure AD join directly. It's something to really consider. It doesn't necessarily need to be all big bang. It normally terrifies people when you talk about it that way, but you can start to transition them. And one of those areas are what users and or their devices in my population, in my inventory of people and whatnot, require access to these applications. It could be just a subset of them, even if it was 50% of them that would use it, and it might be a different 50%. Right? So there's some people that don't need any of these at all, and you might have 25% of your people that are using one set of applications, and a different set or an overlap of 25% they use another one. So identifying what that is will help out in terms of knowing what users can I start to transition, because I'm moving the application. There's always this thought of, well, I'll just do low hanging fruit, which isn't bad, but may not tell the full story of everything that you need to get through. And so really just depends on the application, what's supported. In this case, just pointing out that this line of business application inventory that was started here, it was a custom application, run an IIS server, doing very cool things. And at this stage, we decided to actually put a copy of the server. And instead of putting it in a virtual machine and installing it, which is normally the classic way people feel, especially been in IT a long time. I've been in it for almost 30 years. If it's a VM here, I can make it a VM up there. You could, but then there's that is one approach. But you can start to look at other services like app services, where if you're just deploying like an IIS-based application, or Java, if you have something more modern that somebody's building, Node.js or whatever, that perhaps you should put that in application service. The benefit of this is that tying that directly with something like Azure DevOps, or if you're using GitHub or something else, you can automate the process. So if you are making updates and you want to control what's happening, instead of the developer just saying, well, I have it on my laptop and I just, copy paste and let it go, dig deeper, there's normally problems with that. Or if their computer, where is it? So if they do have a Git-based repository, some kind of source control here, in this example, I'm doing DevOps, you can actually transition to put that, go from your repo and actually deploy it to an app service. It's still just a compute. It still just runs your code. It still can access other databases. In this example, it's an Azure SQL database. And by the way, the long-term impact that you get from doing it in this process, where it's more repeatable, is is highly preferred, because now if we need to make changes or update, or like, oh, we need to, kill that compute and just do another one, it's only a few clicks of the button. You don't have to do a whole new thing. But again, it depends on the application. It has a full installer, that could still work. If it has customizations that could be supported, that could be beneficial. So it's something to take a look at. And if you're going to go cloud only, it's best to start looking at more cloud native deployments. Yes, if you have it containerized already on here, you want to run the container, even better. So, but again, just starting to look at one application that we can start making the move, not really changing much else in the infrastructure here. And then also looking at things like Windows 365 and or Azure Virtual Desktop, if you need to provide support for remote users. Some organizations have had, well, they just use like a log me in or some other kind of third-party tool to remote host to this server, but now I'm still VPNing in. And really, if they're just trying to get access to maybe this application, where even though it's an app service and it can be internet facing, it doesn't have to be. You can still close it off here, but they get access to it via virtualized desktop, or you can even control the connection point for the VPN, or not VPN, but if you had to do VPN, you could do it this way, or other mechanisms for them to access it and control where to access it. So you don't have to be so scared of using this. So this is one of those steps. So we have this VPN connection here, so any users that needed to access it could still access it using that method until you're ready to go, fully through the cloud endpoints.